And welcome back to Sunday Square Off. I am here with digital strategist Josh Zaragoza on the Democratic side, Republican pollster George Caleff. And we're drilling down on voter registration numbers and possible turnout in the primary and general election. Really fascinating stuff. Translate these numbers into the general election. A lot of people are going to hear what we're talking about this morning and saying, aha, blue wave, blue wave. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I've always said there's two big factors that are going to play into the general election. How much does each side's base turn out, and who can speak best to voters in the middle? I think what's happening in the primary speaks that the Democrat base is going to turn out. It's going to outperform itself. Can the Republican base do the same? But the next big thing, which doesn't have as much application from the primary, but one data point that I'll mention that does is who can speak to voters in the middle. And so when we're looking at independent voters who can vote in Arizona primaries here, a lot more of them are choosing than usual to vote in the Democratic primary versus voting in the Republican primary. I think that's something to watch.
They're going Democratic in the primaries.
More so than usual.
More so than in past years. And your polling has shown independents are minus 15. On Donald Trump, 35% approve, 50% disapprove of his performance. Talk to that too, the independent role in these races, and what appeals to them.
Well, first I would like to make the point that unfortunately primary results aren't a harbinger of general election results, but we are seeing these type of voter movements all across the country and locally, so we do think there's going to be a blue wave. Now, as far as independents, where I think they're especially critical is for any statewide candidate like Kyrsten Sinema on the Democratic side. The way I modeled it out, she would actually, in fact, have to win 65% of the independent vote, 65%, and that's with her taking 5 to 10% of the Republican vote. And that's another important critical factor for her to win is there's about 10 to 15% Democratic voter drop-off from the presidential race to the midterm races. So it's important for her to speak to those 10 to 15% Democratic voters and mobilize them to turn out, in addition to that independent voters and those persuasion Republican voters.
So you're saying she needs a landslide among independents?
I would, yeah. I mean, she needs a significant. I don't know how your numbers.
And I think that her ads certainly speak to that. They're right down the middle.
But to George's point, independents are tired of Donald Trump or are not favorable towards him, and they're seeing how he's conducting himself in the highest the highest office in the land, and they're displeased with them. And you know, if that message can carry across, then she can pull 60 to 65%.
That's the message for independents. Tired of Trump.
Well, that, I think, on a federal level, you got to speak to health care, and then on a local level, you have to speak to education.
And if I'm a Republican candidate, like a Doug Ducey running statewide, or other members of Congress, how worried should I be by these numbers?
I mean, look, it's Arizona. There's a lot that has to go really, really perfectly for Democrats to get across the line in a number of these races. If I was the governor, I wouldn't be as worried, or probably hardly worried. If I'm McSally or Ward, whoever makes it out of the GOP primary, I think McSally, I would be much more worried there. I think Sinema has paved the path that she needs to pave, unlike others that have run statewide. But again, a lot has to go perfectly, and there's a lot of increase of Republican turnout from the primary to the general that naturally occurs. And then obviously we're going to have to see how the races play out.
And you mentioned this earlier, a lot of folks are comparing, these special elections, other elections, kind of the one-offs held around the country since the spring as kind of giving them hope. But aren't those really just one-offs where you had all the money was focused, the attention was focused, and you're not going to see that maybe in a CD6 where you have a relatively strong Democratic candidate or other congressional races with strong Democrats?
Well, of course. All we talked about for a month and a half was Debbie Lesko coming out of the primary. It was one of the most talked about primaries with all of the drama that occurred on the Republican side. It's not even going to be the case for CD8, let alone in other congressional districts. So I do think some of the enthusiasm could drop off, and I think Republican enthusiasm, because there's just a lot more registered Republicans, doesn't have to be as high as Democrat enthusiasm has to be.
Okay, lastly, I just want to talk about specific groups of voters and the education voter. Education has surged to the top of the list as an issue for Democrats, and it's pretty high up there for many Republicans. How important a group are they in this election?
Absolutely critical. I think polling statewide shows, well, first of all, for the last few cycles, education has always been at the top of the ballot for statewide races. Having said that, it's never been vote determinant, meaning voters didn't move based on where you were on the education policies. Having said that, this cycle is quite the contrary. So voters are actually moving because of education policy, and the Red for Ed movement is showing that was quite popular as well.
Let's talk about moderate Republican women. I understand there was polling for Doug Ducey that showed he may have a problem with them, especially on the education issue. Are they in play in this election, primary or general?
I mean, look, there's a lot of data nationally and in Arizona that we've shown there is a wide disparity between men and women. So I do think women are at play in a certain sense. I think a lot of these Republican women are still going to continue to come home and vote for Republicans up and down the ballot. I think if this election had coincided obviously with the presidential, it may be a different scenario, but I don't think we're going to see what happened last year for president. Even last year, keep in mind, the same election that Senator McCain won by 11%, President won by 4%, and it was those Republican women that were willing to sort of pick and choose what candidates to vote for.
And let's talk about young people. There's a big push to register millennials, 18 to 35 voters, big push to register Latino voters. Are they going to make any kind of difference this year?
Well, I think Latino voters will make a difference because they're 12 to 17% of the electorate. So in that of itself makes a difference. I do think typically over the last few midterms, Latinos have represented 12% of the electorate. In this case, I think we may see a little surge, and they may represent, I would predict, probably 14 to 15%, given Trump's last 2 years and a lot of the resources that are being put into getting them to turn out. So.
And finally, in all the registration, turnout, models, polling, does Donald Trump always have to be in the back of your mind because you just don't know what's going to happen over the next 3 months?
I mean, that's the question we've been asking internally. Questions have been asking, our clients have been asking us since day one, is what impact does the president play? And I think we're not going to know the answer to that until after Election Day to truly see how many Republicans lose, if any, how it all shakes out, and then what role the president ended up playing. But short of that, the polling has been, from everything that I've looked at, it's been inconclusive. Some months it's yes, some months it's no.
Josh?
Absolutely. If you look at history, modern history, the last 60 years, the party that occupies the White House takes a hit in midterms in after the first 2 years that president's in office. So Donald Trump's the president, and therefore he will be absolutely critical.
All right. Josh Zaragoza, George Caleff, thanks so much for joining us. Great stuff.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us. Have a great weekend.